The Collaboration Chapter 4 Bad Part 4 The law governing the withdrawal of money out of Germany therefore did not adversely affect the business activities of Paramount or 20th Century Fox. These two companies could reinvest their money in local newsreels, and they could then use the German footage all around the world, bringing in excellent profits. But MGM did not make German newsreels, and for years the company had been trying to work out how to get its money out of the country. Only one method, up to this point, had been successful. MGM had managed to sell its blocked Reichsmarks to a German bank in exchange for American currency. In the conversion process, however, MGM incurred massive losses. In December 1938, 1 month after Kristallnacht, MGM discovered a way to export its profits more effectively. An American trade commissioner explained the process. MGM first loaned the money to certain German firms where credit was badly needed. MGM then received bonds in exchange for the loan, and finally sold these bonds abroad at a loss of around 40%, which was a substantial improvement over previous losses. There was just one catch, and it had to do with the firms that were receiving MGM's money in the first place. The firms in question, the American Trade Commissioner said, are connected with the armament industry, especially in the Sudeten territory or Austria. In other words, the largest American-made motion picture company helped to finance the German war machine. The collaboration of American movie studios with Nazi Germany was complex and multifaceted, and as the decade progressed, it evolved in a clearly discernible way. More and more, the Nazis dictated the terms of every encounter, and the studios, instead of leaving the German market, did everything they could to remain. As the years passed, fewer American movies were shown in Germany, but as long as the studios pandered to the whims of the Nazi regime, the collaboration remained as strong as ever. Only at one point, late in the decade, did anyone mount a serious challenge to the prevailing state of affairs. A powerful organization questioned the very morality of the relationship between Hollywood and Germany, and even suggested that the relationship should not be permitted to continue. The organization was not one of the American studios, however, nor it was a pressure group based in the United States. It was the German Reich's own SS. In order to understand the significance of the challenge, it is necessary to turn back slightly to the first half of the 1930s. In that period, film critics in Germany had been more eager to say what they thought about Hollywood movies. The vast majority treated the movies with a sense of awe and astonishment. They praised the Americans' technical superiority, they delighted in a light comedy touch, and they complimented the deep understanding of the leader principle. Time after time they announced, "Our directors could learn a lot from these American films." Occasionally, some reviewers gave less favorable opinions. In May 1934, for example, the critic for Völkischer Beobachter went to see what perhaps was the worst American movie that ever reached Nazi Germany. Miss Fane's Baby is Stolen. This critic found it painful to watch the main star's dreadful overacting, and the next day his review appeared. "Fine," he said. "We adore and love children too, but it would have been better not to show us this film if one intended to invoke the American mentality now as an excuse." This was a common complaint. A significant number of German films therefore dismissed Hollywood productions as kitsch. They attacked the excessive sentimentality of the storylines, and they made fun of the happy endings. Taken as a whole, German film criticism of Hollywood in this early period consisted of a curious mixture of unbridled enthusiasm and predictable anti-Americanism. Then, in late 1936, Joseph Goebbels abolished film criticism in Germany and ordered journalists to provide film description instead. His employees in the propaganda ministry began issuing instructions on how to write about specific American movies that were being shown around the country. Here are a couple of examples of what they said. "The American film, Honolulu, Metro, is full of humorous ideas, refreshingly fast-paced, and contains dance sequences, catchy music, and gags about mistaken identity. a very pleasant entertainment. It is gratifying that it is able to bring harmless amusement to these serious times. Rosemarie belongs to that genre of films that wins over an audience seeking entertainment with endearing melodies and beautiful open-air shots. Reviewers can point out that the film is 4 years old, and that there is a noticeable difference in American film technology between then and now. The vast majority of reviewers adhere to these directives, and as a result, German film writing in the latter half of the 1930s became increasingly bland. The reviews simply gave brief plot summaries along a few trivial observations about the films in question. True criticism is all but disappeared. Every now and then, however, an article appeared in the German press that was not only thoughtful, but also questioned the whole validity of showing American movies in Germany in the first place. In 1938, a critic named Wilhelm Frels published one such article about the latest technological innovation in Hollywood, the arrival of Technicolor. Frels explained two of the earliest Technicolor movies, Ramona and Wings of the Morning, both of which had recently been shown in Germany. But unlike everyone else, he was not interested in how these films had been improved by the new technology. He was more concerned with how these films had fooled the unsuspecting German public. As he explained, colored films love to use colored people because of their more effective skin tone. He was absolutely right. Both Ramona and Wings of the Morning had told stories about non-whites, and both films had lingered on their characters' bodies as objects of attraction and fascination. It is unlikely that any other reviewer had picked up on this connection before. The first Technicolor picture to be screened in Germany, Frels said, was nothing more than a dirty trick. In its provocative opening scene, an Indian chief named Alessandro stumbled upon a beautiful white woman who was stuck in a tree. He helped her down, and later that evening he learned about her name. She was Ramona, and that dozens of men had ridden more than 40 miles to meet her. It was one thing for an Indian to be attracted to a white woman, but it was quite another when she was attracted to him. In the days that followed, Ramona and Alessandro spent an increasing amount of time together, and at the peak of their courtship, the Technicolor film captured something absolutely shocking. A white woman in the arms of a man dressed in colorful Indian garb. That was when the trick was revealed. Ramona's stepmother walked in on the scene and sent the Indian away. Then she took Ramona aside. "You've been brought up in my house as my own daughter," she said. "All the time I've lived in fear that sooner or later the blood of your mother would come out." "How can you speak that way of my mother?" Ramona protested. "Why, she was your own sister." "She was not," the stepmother yelled. "She was an Indian squaw." The stepmother proceeded to explain that Ramona's father, a man of good family, had made a tragic mistake with a native woman. Later that night, Ramona left the ranch on which she had been brought up and ran back to Alessandro's arms. As the couple kissed, the image on the screen tried to atone for the earlier, shocking one. Maybe it was the darkness of the night, or maybe it was that of the revelation. Whatever the case, the contrast between the two lovers did not seem anywhere near as sharp as before. Wilhelm Frels was unimpressed by this erasure of racial difference. He thought that it was in bad taste to play games with the issue of mixed marriage, especially after the Nazis had put so much effort into eradicating the problem in Germany. If Ramona was bad, however, the next film was even worse. "This subject, which is a bluff in Ramona," Frels said, "in Wings of the Morning turns out to be a completely unambiguous statement." Frels was probably not that surprised that Ramona had been passed by the censors. He had almost certainly read the Karl May stories that were extremely popular in Germany, and that gave a romantic account of the dying Indians. A film like Ramona was more or less acceptable in Germany, and it could even be described in Goebbels' newspaper, the conflict between the brave Indian and the evil white men. Wings of the Morning was something else entirely. This film dealt with one of the groups that the Nazis had explicitly selected for persecution. Its title in Germany was The Gypsy Princess. Here, once again, was a Technicolor film that took the side of colored people. The film showed a white man falling in love with a colorfully dressed gypsy woman, and even apologizing to her for the prejudice of his friends. These people, they've got no imagination, no understanding. Only this time, it was not a trick. The man did not turn out to be a gypsy in the end. The film was making a completely unambiguous statement in favor of mixed marriage. Frells was disgusted. The first two Technicolor movies that had been screened in Germany, he said, used Technicolor to glorify colored people. He was not sure whether the Americans were doing this out of principle or out of foolishness, but he, for one, was not going to watch the next Technicolor movie to find out. It was certainly very strange that Wings of the Morning, a movie that glorified gypsies, had been permitted in Germany at this particular point in time. Only 9 months earlier, Dr. Seeger had banned a Laurel and Hardy picture called The Bohemian Girl because it portrayed gypsies in the objectionable life of gypsies in a kitschy form. Seeger had explained, and it has no place in our nation. How, then, could the censors have permitted Wings of the Morning, a much more serious picture that explicitly spoke out on behalf of this persecuted people? Here is the likely answer. Ever since the censors had started checking up on the racial origins of the film's cast and crew, they had been paying less attention to the film itself. They had spent so much of their time researching the background of Hollywood personalities that they had sometimes forgotten to take into account a film's actual content. Consequently, a few titles had slipped through their fingers. For the remainder of the decade, this phenomenon continued to occur. In the middle of 1938, for example, Paramount submitted a movie called Shanghai to the German censors. The movie was about a successful businessman whose father was white and whose mother was a Manchurian princess. For some reason, whenever a man had relations with a woman of a different race, she always turned out to be a princess. The entire film was a plea for tolerance and understanding, and it ended with the following lines. Someday, prejudice may die, convention goes stale. Men will be judged not for their creed, but for color of their... Men will be judged not for their creed or color, but for their merits. We may not live to see that day. I pray God we will. Because Shanghai dealt with the race problem, a subject that was just then very popular in Germany, Paramount submitted it to the censors and promoted it to the propaganda ministry. After a long discussion, Shanghai was approved. After much hemming and hawing, because Paramount didn't have anything better, but not because it dealt with the race problem. The film premiered in Germany in September 1938, and although Hitler found it boring and could not watch it to the end, the German press reviewed it very favorably. Whenever an earth-shattering problem can be included, like the race problem, the American production companies gladly include it. The fact that the Asian-American intermarriage problem is acted out and solved by two such striking actors as Charles Boyer, the unforgettable lead in La Bataille, and Loretta Young, will ensure that this film will receive particular attention in Germany. And so, Shanghai, like Ramona and the Wings of the Morning, was blindly accepted by most German film critics. Only Wilhelm Frells and a few others had noticed, or had dared to notice, that these movies contradicted the official ideology of the Third Reich. But while a small group of isolated film critics could not possibly make a difference, a larger, more powerful organization might. At the beginning of 1940, a Shirley Temple movie entitled Susanna of the Mounties was screened in Germany. The German public just adored Shirley Temple. Goebbels called her a wonderful child. But this film, like Ramona, was about the relationship between whites and Indians in the United States. Given the sensitivity of this subject matter, the propaganda ministry carefully told the press how to review it. In Susanna of the Mounties, from Fox, the little Shirley Temple reveals her incredible gift with great poignancy. The Wild West plot she has been placed in provides a good setting for this entertainment, too. The newspapers all followed these instructions and reviewed Susanna of the Mounties as an example of harmless entertainment. But the SS, Hitler's major paramilitary organization, appeared to have picked up on something truly disturbing about the picture. Just a few minutes before the end, Shirley Temple pricked her finger and exchanged her blood with the blood of a young Indian boy. The SS soon expressed anger that films with Shirley Temple are currently being screened in Munich, and added, "We are lodging particular complaints against the press articles that cast Susanna of the Mounties in a most positive light." A few months later, the SS reacted to a different film that was still being screened at theaters throughout Germany, Ramona. The main criticism of the plot was that an Indian, whom the whites had originally hated, was suddenly considered their equal the moment he converted to Catholicism, the SS said. It was felt to be incomprehensible that a film whose content so grossly contradicts National Socialist ideology could still be shown. The SS had picked up on a glaring contradiction, but even this powerful organization could not bring an end to the relationship with the Hollywood studios. The relationship continued, and more American movies that contradicted National Socialist ideology were shown in Germany. The SS was unable to understand how such a thing were possible, but there were two simple reasons. The censors were approving films with little or no regard to content, and the propaganda ministry was issuing instructions on how these films needed to be reviewed in the papers. There was one final reason for this strange phenomenon, and it had to do with the people in the audience. The majority of film viewers in Germany were neither as radical as the SS nor as perspective as Wilhelm Frels. When they went to the movies, they almost certainly did not connect a film's overall message to the purported aims of the Nazi regime. They simply did what everyone else in the world did. They identified with the good guys and against the bad guys. And if the racial policies of the Nazi regime more fit in line with the ideology of the bad guys, it is unlikely that the people in the audience stopped to think about it. The reception of one last film provides a useful illustration of this point. The film was a musical called Let Freedom Ring, and it premiered in Berlin at the end of February 1940. It was written by one of the most prolific screenwriters in Hollywood, Ben Hecht. And Hecht used to play a little game with himself. He would have his hero utter a few semi-intelligent remarks, and he would try his best to prevent these remarks from being cut out by the producer. In this case, he managed to get them past the Nazi censors. The setup was conventional enough. A railroad owner named Jim Knox was using dirty business methods against the honest inhabitants of a small town. He offered to buy their land at a low price, and if they refused to sell, he had his men burn their houses down. One evening, he paid a visit to a landowner named Thomas Logan, who was particularly stubborn. Logan said that his son Steve, a Harvard-educated lawyer, would soon be back to stand up for everyone's rights. At just that moment, Steve walked through the door. He chided his father for getting in the way of the railroads, and he expressed his willingness to cooperate with Jim Knox. Of course he was lying. He was on the side of his family and friends, but he could not say so openly. His plan was to save the town by seizing on an inalienable right, the freedom of the press. He printed a large number of inflammatory pamphlets, and he secretly distributed them to Knox's foreign workers, urging them to unite and stand up against their tyrannical leader. When this failed, he sang them a song, in which he tried to tell them that, as Americans, they were all free. But still, he was having difficulties. All the characters in the film, even the bad guys, were simply enjoying the song. Audiences in Germany probably would have enjoyed the song too, if it had not been cut from the German version. One scene in the film, however, was definitely not cut. At the climax, Steve had a debate with Jim Knox in front of the foreign workers, and the dialogue remained. Steve was telling them to stand up for their rights, and Knox was telling them to return to their quarters. "Will you listen to me once more?" Steve said. "The cattle boats that brought you here? But I say, you're men. Get back to your bunkhouses, all of you. I say you came here looking for liberty and freedom, and you'll not lie down in the mud at Jim Knox's feet. Don't listen to him. I'm the boss here. Your boss calls you the pick of the swill barrels and the riffraff from everywhere. I call you something else. I call you Americans. Come on, come on. I'm giving orders. There's no tyrant to give orders in this country. There's no man bigger or stronger than you if you'll raise your heads. Come on, Sheriff, get him out of here. And that was when something extraordinary happened. The camera cut to a close-up of Steve, who looked the Third Reich in the face and said, "You Germans and Italians, you Jews and Russians and Irish, all of you who are oppressed." And just as Steve was about to give up all his hope, his girlfriend Maggie started singing "Let Freedom Ring," and the workers overthrew their tyrannical leader. It is impossible to know for certain whether the line about Jews was ultimately included in the German version of the film. According to the American records, only 3 deletions were made for the German version. Steve Logan's song praising the United States as the land of liberty, a reference to a character as an Irish windmill, and a violent fistfight. And, according to the censorship report, Steve speaks to the people who still did not dare to rebel against Knox. When Knox thinks that Steve has lost, Maggie starts to sing the national anthem. Everyone joins in, and the defeated Knox runs away. Regardless of whether the line about Jews was included, however, the bulk of the speech undoubtedly remained. At this very late point in time, a Hollywood movie was shown in Germany that argued against prejudice and oppression, that urged its audiences to rebel against a tyrannical ruler. The movie was quite successful, playing in Berlin for 21 days in its first run, and according to all the reviews, was generally well liked. But was it really subversive in Nazi Germany? There is no evidence to suggest that anyone thought the film was criticizing Hitler, and one of the reviewers actually came out with the opposite interpretation. After giving a summary of the plot, Steve Logan had stood up to the railroad owner Jim Knox. The reviewer attacked Knox as a dirty Jewish exploiter. In other words, the reviewer thought that the villain of the film was meant to be a Jew. More than anything else, this interpretation highlighted the powerlessness of Hollywood movies in this period. Even the movies that contained veiled references to fascism were useless. Audiences in Germany could watch them and still come out with interpretations that suited their own purposes. They could identify with the same good guys and against the same bad guys as audiences all around the world, and still emerge from the screenings thinking that their system of government was superior to all others. There was just one type of movie for which this would never be the case: the anti-Nazi movie. Audiences in Germany could not possibly interpret Hollywood feature films if they were the bad guys, and consequently, these were the only movies that the German government treated with genuine concern. In turning to these movies, it is necessary to shift back slightly to the time before the collaboration between Hollywood and the Nazis began. End of Chapter 4. Bad.